Club of Portland's Friday Forum. Today is Friday, May 18th, and I welcome you all to the state's premier Affairs event. I'm Melody Rose. I'm delighted to be your president, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike. Those of you who are with us in the Governor Hotel, those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, and those watching on Portland Community Media's Sitting at 30. We are extremely pleased today to be partnering with our friends at the Willamette Valley Development Officers for today's forum. WVDO is a nonprofit organization that provides education, resources, and networking to nonprofit fundraising professionals. We want to thank them for their role in bringing our speaker here today and for adding so many new faces to our audience. Thank you, WVDO, and thank you to the conference participants. Today we will hear about how nonprofits are opening their doors to innovation. But first, just a few club announcements. I'd like to begin by giving a warm welcome to the club's newest members, Greg Wallinger and Joanne Zuhl. Would you please stand so we can welcome you to the club? City Club's corporate and media partners are essential to the ongoing vitality and sustainability of all of our beloved club's activities. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, for making these events possible. I would also like to extend our deepest appreciation to the Friday Forum's spring season corporate sponsors, ESCO Corporation, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, and Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt. We are grateful for your support, and we could not do this work without you. And if your company or firm would like to support City Club's mission through sponsorship, please visit with our staff at the back of the room or come into the City Club offices. We'd love to chat with you. City Club launched our spring membership drive on April 1st with the ambitious goal of adding 250 new members to our ranks. Please support City Club in the pursuit of this goal. There are incentives for you in the room to participate in this month's membership drive. All new members will save $25 if you join City Club today or at any time during the month of May. Even better, when you recruit a new City Club member, you will be entered to win 2 tickets to Portland Center Stage and a dinner on us at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. So please bring your friends to the club and join today. City Club is wrapping up its annual fund drive for the year, and we are only $6,000 away from our final $100,000 goal. Since I'm speaking in a room of fundraising professionals, I know that you know the impact that every donation makes, and I know that I would be remiss if I didn't make the ask. So please, support City Club and all of its programs by picking up a donation envelope and giving a generous contribution today. Help us fill the gap. Next week, on Tuesday, May 22nd, City Club's Agora Committee invites you to join them for a discussion of Hector Tobar's new book, The Barbarian Nurseries, which examines the many views on American immigration. Agora is sponsored by Tonkin Torp and Sterling Savings Bank. On May 29th, the New Leaders Council is offering a leadership training on politics for non-political professionals. This roundtable discussion will provide an opportunity for participants of all ages to learn a range of core political skills, from recognizing when a political issue exists to transforming a political message into action. NLC is sponsored by the Port of Portland. Following today's talk, we will be welcoming City Club and WVDO members to the microphone for a Q&A session with our honored speaker. In addition, we invite all guests today to locate the index cards on your tables, write your questions on them during the forum, and please hold them up high when I ask. City Club staff will collect these cards, which I will read from the microphone, and we're sure you will all have good questions for our speaker. And now, our program. How can nonprofits and foundations navigate these challenging economic times while capitalizing on some of the most exciting trends in decades? Today, here at our forum, co-sponsored by the Willamette Valley Development Officers, social entrepreneur Darian Rodriguez-Heyman will deliver helpful resources and keen insights into how the nonprofit landscape is changing, including how to engage the next generation of leaders, how to diversify staff and board members, and how today's listeners can seize unique opportunities for their organizations. Darian Rodriguez-Heyman is a serial social entrepreneur who, while working at the Craigslist Foundation, grew the organization from zero budget and no staff or programs, with offices reportedly in his bedroom, to a 7-figure operation with a robust staff and a board of nationally recognized leaders. Simultaneously, he grew the nonprofit Boot Camp into the largest nonprofit gathering in San Francisco history, and launching a website that connected millions of leaders to resources and to each other with the help of a network of hundreds of partners throughout our country. And so with that, without further ado, please help me in welcoming our speaker to the podium, Darian Heyman.
Thank you, Melody, for having me, and thank you to Cambia for making this possible. Well, before I get started, before I say anything, before I do anything, I'd like your help with something. I want to get a sense of who's in the audience, and I'd like you to get a sense yourselves of who you're surrounded by today. So I'd like to do a quick exercise. I'm going to ask some of you to stand up. Please remain standing after you're called on. So, first of all, will those of you that stood up for civil rights in the 1960s please stand up and be recognized for your contribution? Please remain standing. So we've got about a dozen folks, 2 dozen folks. How about those of you that have stood up for women's rights? Please stand up and be recognized for your contribution. Those of you that have stood up for education, for our schools and our children, please stand up and be recognized. Those of you that stood up for the environment, for the health and safety of our planet, please stand up and be recognized. And finally, those of you that ever stood up for anything you believed in, please stand up and be recognized. Now, before you sit down, just do me a quick favor. Take a look to your left, and take a look to your right, and I mean at each other. And just bask in this moment for a second, because I think all too often when we're involved in social change work, there's a sense of loneliness. There's a sense of pushing that proverbial boulder up the hill. And what I want you to realize at this moment is that you are never alone, that you are constantly surrounded by great company. You are constantly surrounded by the heroes and by the sheroes that we've been waiting for. And these are solutionaries. These are people that, although there are many problems in the world, they are focused on being part of the solution. So I salute you, and it's an honor to be with you today. Thank you. So today, as we look at this concept, this idea of innovation, I want to talk about the changing role of both foundations and philanthropists in social change. As you heard, my name is Darian Rodriguez-Heyman. Just very briefly, you heard about my background with Craigslist Foundation and their nonprofit boot camp. I started actually in the for-profit sector. I'm a .com refugee. and started one of the first digital advertising agencies even before Google or Facebook existed. But after that, I made a conscious decision while on sabbatical, after we had sold the company and took it to almost 400 people in 28 countries, to devote my life to philanthropy, to the arts, to making the world a better place and using my powers for good. And so that's what led me to Craigslist Foundation. That's also what led me to write a book called Nonprofit Management 101, where I got 50 different experts across 35 topics to really create, hopefully, what I thought of as the first truly comprehensive and yet practical guide to nonprofit management. More recently, I also served as a commissioner for the environment for the city and county of San Francisco, where I got to work on the largest solar rebate program in the country. And when my book came out, we launched a global conference series called Social Media for Nonprofits. And it's the country's only series focused on social media for social good. We'll actually be here in Seattle, close by, on November 1st. So I've done a lot of different things and really worked across all of the sectors. And as a result, I've gotten an interesting perspective on what cross-sector collaboration looks like. And I'll talk a little bit about that today. But most importantly, what I wanted to talk about today, as we look at innovation, as we look at trends, as we look at not just the future, but what we can do today about that, are really three topics. I want to talk about social media. I want to talk today about some of these emerging trends in philanthropy in the nonprofit space. And as you heard in the introduction, I want to talk about next generation leadership. Now, I should say, and really go on record, that if you leave today, if you leave this talk inspired, then I actually don't feel like I've done my job. Because my job is not simply to inspire, it's to inspire you to action. What are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do differently that's going to make you more effective, more efficient at serving the community, at advancing that cause that you care so deeply about? And so I'm also committed to leaving you today with some very practical tips, insights, tools, some things that you can put to work immediately that can really benefit your cause. So let's get started with social media. How many of you were on Facebook in the last 30 days? That's about everybody, for those of you at home. Anybody know how many people in the world were on Facebook in the last 30 days? 901 million, right? That makes Facebook the third largest country on the planet. Every month, enough people join Facebook, it's bigger than the LA Times' entire subscription base. And by the way, this is not just the kids anymore. The fastest growing audience on Facebook is women over the ages of 45. So this is the online equivalent of Main Street. And this creates huge, huge opportunities. There's an amazing array of reasons why nonprofits and foundations are flocking to social media. Number one, because there's an increasingly large number of eyeballs there. But number two, there's very low barriers to entry. Have any of you seen the Kony 2012 video? I really encourage you to go to YouTube, check out Kony, K-O-N-Y, 2012.com. This video is the fastest video in history to reach 100 million viewers on YouTube. And it was produced by a small nonprofit outfit out of San Diego. How is that possible? That's because there are no barriers to entry in this new environment. And so that's a really big opportunity. Another huge opportunity, especially since I'm addressing a room full of fundraisers, is that from a fundraising standpoint, traditionally we like to say in development work that the most powerful form of ask is a peer ask. I invite you to join me in supporting the work of this organization. That's the best way to raise money. That's why it's so crucial that we get our board members and our staff members engaged in the fundraising process. Well, what is social media other than the most powerful form of peer-to-peer based fundraising ever? It's a hugely powerful medium and opportunity. And in particular, what it allows us to do is to turn our donors into fundraisers. It's just one extra step when someone makes a donation through your website to say, click here to share this news on Facebook, on Twitter, on another platform, and they get a pre-populated message that says, I just gave $100 to the City Club's annual campaign. Won't you follow my lead? Won't you join me in supporting the great work of this esteemed organization? All of a sudden, you're getting 20, maybe even 200% more donations just by facilitating that process. So that is a huge opportunity. There's also an opportunity for crowdsourcing. And this is a term that gets thrown around a lot in the .com world. But what we're talking about here, just to bring this home, is many of you probably remember the Encyclopedia Britannica. I used it for book reports when I was growing up. How many of you know that only about 2 weeks ago, they just made a decision to stop printing their hard copy version? Anybody know the one-word reason why they decided that? Wikipedia, exactly. Right? So what you have here is a perfect example of a fundamental revolution that has happened in the world, which is this. We have entered a world where everyone is smarter than anyone. Everyone is smarter than anyone. What do I mean by that? What I mean is the Encyclopedia Britannica, with its millions of dollars and dozens of PhDs who are experts in any given topic, cannot compete with a small nonprofit with a handful of staff and a relatively small budget that is, instead of relying on this base of knowledge that is the traditional top-down hierarchical approach to disseminating information, instead is based on this bottom-up approach, is based on this many hands make light work approach. Look at YouTube, who I just mentioned a second ago. Every day, over 100,000 videos are uploaded on YouTube, and they're all rated and reviewed and tagged, and no Hollywood studio on earth could hope to compete with that. Right? So the question is not, can you be the next YouTube? But the question is, how can you put the community to work for your cause and do it in a way that is a mutually beneficial partnership? And that is a huge, huge unheralded opportunity. I'm going to talk in a second about following the money, which is another reason why nonprofits are increasingly getting online. But the other thing I want to mention is that just like Coney 2012, social media has the ability to help take your message viral. People have heard the term going viral. People don't necessarily know what it means a lot of the times. Well, what it means, in short, is I might know the 400 of you, but each and every one of you, on average, has 130 Facebook friends. So if I tell you something, and you tell everyone you know, I'm reaching thousands, maybe even millions of people. So there's this snowball effect, this domino effect that the internet makes possible. And I'll tell you, there's actually a very simple formula for taking your message and your cause viral. It's a little counterintuitive, but it's this. C plus C plus C equals C. I know. So let me explain. If you want your message to go viral, if you want people to tell your story for you, first and foremost, the message that you're sharing must be compelling. It's not the what, it's the so what. We have entered an attention economy. Why should I care is the question that everybody's asking all the time. Why does this message merit not only my attention, but my 130 Facebook friends on average? So your message must be compelling. Number two, it must be concise. We're dealing with 140 characters at a time on Twitter. And not to mention, aside from the technological restrictions, if you want me to remember your message and reiterate it, it's got to be brief. So not only is it compelling, but it's concise. And finally, it must be credible. There's lots of other groups that believe they can solve homelessness in Portland. Why should I believe that your group is the one that's going to make it happen? Tell me about your track record, your partners, your innovative approach. And when you have a message that is compelling, it is concise, and it is credible, then it can go contagious. And that's when you have a viral message. So I encourage you to keep that in mind. I mentioned a moment ago about follow the money. What I mean by that is Over $300 billion a year is donated by individuals to nonprofits in this country. On average, that happens in $92 increments from people making under $100,000 a year. This is not the Bill Gates of the world. This is you and me. It's a grassroots movement. And what's interesting is that currently 13% of those dollars are being transacted online. But we are seeing a huge surge. We're at tens of billions of dollars a year right now, but it's growing, more importantly, at 35 to 55% a year. That is a phenomenal growth trajectory. We're seeing gifts of $1,000 plus becoming increasingly commonplace. We're seeing gifts given through traditional channels. It's becoming very common for these donors to consult your website or a resource like Charity Navigator or GuideStar before making that contribution. So your online presence is becoming vital. Now, as you consider your online presence, and in particular as you look to social media and how to capitalize on the opportunities that it presents, I want to share 5 tips very quickly that are very simple, that are things, like I said, that you can put to work tomorrow that can advance your efforts moving forward. Number 1, ask questions. If your Facebook post ends in a question mark instead of a period, you can expect about 5 times as much engagement from your community in the form of likes, comments, and shares, which is Facebook currency in this attention economy, right? You're at the water cooler. You're at a cocktail party. Don't just talk at people, talk with them. And the easiest way to do that is to ask them a question and invite their response. By the way, add photos and videos, and that will help even more. Or links on Twitter are very effective. Number 2, the time of day that you post is actually quite critical. And there's been some research done to show that weekends are very effective. And during the week in particular, especially if you're targeting a business audience, there are 4 times of day that have been proven to be most effective. And again, this is aggregate data, so the key is to do some research and some experimentation to see what your audience responds best to. But those 4 times of day are basically when people have their downtime. So it's when they're on their way into work and they're on the subway or the bus from about 8 to 9 a.m. It's during their lunch break from noon to 1 when they're on their smartphones or iPads. It's at the end of the day when they're on their way home, or maybe when the boss ain't looking, from 4:30 to 6 p.m. But actually the data shows that the best time to post is after the kids go to sleep, 9:30 to 11 p.m. So at least as a starting point, I would encourage you to think about those times of day. And you can use free tools like Hootsuite, which is Hootsuite, or TweetDeck, to pre-schedule all of your Twitter posts, all of your tweets, so that you don't have to be logging onto Twitter 5 times a day at those times of day. You can schedule a month's worth of messaging in a couple hours, right? So this is a very effective and efficient tool that I would encourage you to use, especially for Twitter. However, I wouldn't encourage you to use it for Facebook. There's an algorithm that Facebook uses to determine how many of your followers will see your post, and it downgrades you when you use those types of third-party applications. Number 3, and this is kind of interesting because Facebook has something that's publicly known as an edge ranking. What's happened is the way Facebook works has changed. In the early days, if you all were my followers or my fans, if you had liked my cause, then every time I posted something, if you got on Facebook in a relatively short amount of time after I did that, that post would show up in your feed. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. Why is that? Because we've entered an attention economy. And Facebook realizes that with this huge number of people in its audience, that if they just let everybody see everything, you would get overwhelmed. You would tune out. There'd be a lot of garbage. And so they have taken on the role of a traffic cop. And they are now using an algorithm they've created, again known as an edge ranking, to determine, are you boring or are you hip? And is any individual post that you're putting up there boring or hip? And again, the currency in Facebook's attention economy is likes, comments, and shares. So what'll happen is If every time you put up a post, it's boring and nobody cares, sort of if a tweet falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it type thing, then they're going to assume, pretty rightfully so, that you're a boring person. And the next time you post, they're not really going to show it to anybody. On the flip side, if every time you post people are liking, they're commenting, they're sharing, it's a very vibrant and engaging dialogue with your community, they're going to assume you're pretty hip, and the next time you post something, they're going to make sure everybody sees it. Well, how do you become hip, right? Number one, ask questions. The algorithm likes that, and that's because people like that. I also talked about media, photos, videos are crucial, and definitely tag people, because they will come and they will check it out and make a comment. But another interesting thing, a way to sort of seed the pool, if you will, is to create a social media marketing committee, to recruit your board, your staff, some of your key allies, and send them a very short email once a week saying, thanks for agreeing to help us catapult our social media presence forward. Here's a link to our Facebook page. Please just go there and like, comment, or share on 2 or 3 of our posts. This will take you no more than 2 minutes. Wow, now you've got 50 people on a regular basis that are engaging with your Facebook presence. What's that algorithm going to think? Really simple yet effective way to become hip. From a fundraising standpoint, because that's a lot of what we're here to talk about today at this conference, probably the most important thing to keep in mind as it relates to social media fundraising is the crucial point, and Sally Struthers had this right years ago, of mapping donations to impact, right? For the price of a cup of coffee, this kid's going to go to school for a year. Well, never before has that been more crucial than in social media, than online, where people are hit by so many different messages. Again, why should I care? Tell me why this is compelling. And the answer is, Kay Sprinkle Grace probably said it best when she said, people don't give to you, they give through you. People don't give to you, she said, because you have needs, but because you meet needs. So we as a sector are a conduit. And I'm not giving to your organization, I'm giving to the people that you're ultimately benefiting. So help me understand by thinking incrementally. If you are going to achieve X on your current trajectory, but with a gift of $1,000 or $1 million, you're going to achieve X plus 10. Well, talk to me about that delta, about that difference, because that's ultimately what I'm going to make possible, right? And anything you can do to really operationalize that difference is going to benefit your fundraising efforts. Look at kiva.org or at Donors Choose, who do such a great job. Charity Water is another group, where they really help you understand the incremental impact of your contribution. Look at Heifer International, where for $50 you can buy someone a swarm of bees, and they'll have honey and wax. For $100, they'll get a calf, and they'll have milk and cheese. For $500, they'll have a flock of sheep, and they'll have wool and meat. That's concrete, right? And so on your donate page, have those levels mapped out, and have not just the default dollar amount, but what does each of those dollar amounts make possible? And then look at the data. Play around with those dollar amount levels that you have as your defaults. Play around with the language associated with each of those, and then look at the data and see what actually drives the best results. My friends at Network for Good, who wrote the online fundraising chapter in my book, they changed their donate button from gray to red, and in an instant, they got 30% more online donations through their website. Gray to red. So don't be afraid to experiment with your donate button, with the copy on your donate page, etc. And I will tell you one thing in particular about online contributions, which is I encourage each and every one of you to do a little test. Go to every page in your website and try and make a donation. And I will tell you right now that if it takes you more than 3 clicks to make a donation, you need to revamp your website, because you are losing about 10 to 15% of your audience on average at every click. And this is the equivalent of people with full shopping carts walking down the aisle that are getting to the front of your store saying, the line's too long, forget it. So get out of your own way and enable people to support your efforts. And finally, tip number 5 is to socialize your giving experience. And again, this is as simple as having a technology platform, a donation processing engine that will allow you not only to take donations, but to facilitate the process of donors spreading the word about their contributions to their social networks. There's a wide variety of these platforms: Fundly, Razoo, Causes, Salsa Labs if you're doing a lot of advocacy work, Rally, Donor Pages, Convio and Blackbaud for some of the bigger organizations. And so I really encourage you to look at this. And finally, the anti-tip I want to share is to avoid what I call the empty store phenomenon. What I mean by that is I would rather you not set up a Facebook or a Twitter presence than have your summer intern who's got 2 weeks left in his tenure set you up with a page and then go off to school and you have no strategy left to keep your shelves stocked, so to speak. Just like you wouldn't open a store even on Main Street with no plan to keep inventory in stock, so too should you not get involved with social media unless you're really committed to putting in the time and maintaining a vibrant presence. A couple resources around social media that I would like to share. Facebook has a nonprofit resource center at facebook.com/nonprofits, a lot of how-tos and great case studies. Google, similarly, at google.com/nonprofits, has a variety of different offerings and some tutorials. Google Analytics is a great free tool to assess your website traffic. Google Grants, if you don't know about this, you can get $10,000 a month of free advertising on Google if you're a 501c3. Great resource. Beth Cantor writes a blog that's really wonderful. My friends at TechSoup, you can spend about 2 cents on the dollar for software, and they have a very vibrant online community of nonprofit tech folks, as does IN10, NTEN, the Nonprofit Technology Enterprise Network, in10.org. They also do a wonderful annual conference, and they're the fiscal sponsor, I should mention, of Social Media for Nonprofits, that conference series that we put on, which is sm4np.org. So, moving on into trends in philanthropy, probably one of the biggest things that I've seen is around this big trend of social entrepreneurship and social enterprise. And what exactly does this mean anyway? Because I mean, I've taught this I teach at UC Berkeley at their business school. And it's interesting because there's not really a set definition. But Wikipedia actually has one that I think hits it on the nose, which is someone who recognizes a social problem and uses entrepreneurial principles to organize, create, and manage a venture to make social change. And what's interesting there is a couple things. Number one is, first and foremost, these are people who define success as impact in the community. And that means that these people are mission-driven, first and foremost. What you don't see in this definition, though, is anything having to do with nonprofit sector, religion, anything like that. This is not limited by sector. Anyone can be a change maker. You also see this focus on advancing systemic change. Thoreau said that for every 1,000 that hack at the branches of evil, only one strikes at the root. These are people striking at the root of needed change. These are people like Jesus of Nazareth, of Buddha, of pretty much any religious leader that you can think of, or of Gandhi, or of Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work around microfinance. These are the change makers, the solutionaries. And I think it was Martin Luther King, another social entrepreneur in and of his own right, who probably said one of the most poignant things that I think of in terms of getting at the core of what it means to be a social entrepreneur. He once said that true compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars requires restructuring. An edifice which produces beggars requires restructuring. That, first and foremost, is the work of social entrepreneurs. A couple resources in this arena that are really great. Ashoka, started by Bill Drayton, who really popularized the concept of social entrepreneurship. They give away fellowship grants, and they also bring a lot of awareness to some amazing social entrepreneurs like Van Jones, who's really helped catapult the whole green jobs movement in this country. Echoing Green is also another fellowship program that also brings a lot of awareness to its grantees. Skoll Foundation has an online community for social entrepreneurs called Social Edge, where I've written some blogs. And finally, David Bornstein wrote a great book called How to Change the World, which profiles a lot of these amazing leaders. So I hope those are helpful. Within the context of social entrepreneurship, I want to look briefly at earned income and at impact investing. And I think this is a really phenomenal opportunity because what you're seeing is the rise of what are known as triple bottom line organizations. Organizations not just dedicated to providing a financial return, but a social and an environmental return. And what is equally as exciting as all the B Corps and the LC3s that are popping up is that there is a new breed of investors, of institutions even, that are dedicated to supporting these kinds of organizations. Collectively, they are known as impact investors. I would encourage every foundation representative in the audience to consider what you can do to be part of this really important trend. You are all mission-led organizations, and yet traditionally foundations typically rely on that 5% of their grant-making portfolio to make social change, to meet their mission. Well, what about the 95%? And what's really exciting is that there's some trends around mission-related investing, around investing in more responsible stocks and bonds that do relate to your mission, and even of program-related investing, where they're going in and they're underwriting loans, they're subsidizing loans, they're making investments out of that 95% that aren't just in stocks and bonds, but they're helping to create businesses. They're helping to create earned income enterprises for nonprofits that also advance the mission of the foundation. And I would encourage the foundations in the audience to consider carving out at least a portion of your budget and dedicating it to responsible investment opportunities. The other thing that I would encourage foundations to do, and this is a really exciting trend, is taking an active role in promoting collaboration. We were just talking about this before the session. And I find that a lot of foundation representatives are frustrated because they come to me and they say, well, we got 10 grant applications for pretty much the same project. And obviously these guys don't know about each other. And so I ask them, well, did you take the time to connect them? And usually they say, well, that's not my job, right? So, but the point here is that given the dangling carrot that the foundations possess in the form of their charitable support, you are in the best position possible, not just simply to connect the dots, as it were, but to incentivize collaboration, to carve out a portion of your grant-making portfolio and say that 10% of our grants will only be given to collaborative proposals that involve more than one nonprofit organization. You don't have to tell them exactly what that collaboration looks like or how those budgets need to be allocated, but it has to be collaborative. Let's start to put our money where our proverbial mouth is. And in general, I think, as a sector, there's just so much opportunity for increased collaboration. Another beautiful Kay Sprinkle Gracism is she talks about the importance of laying our silos down on their side and turning them into pipelines. And how can we do that? And probably first and foremost, the thing that we can do is to take a step back and to realize that we have been hoodwinked, that we have been boondoggled. Because ever since we were born, each and every one of us that grew up in this Western culture was taught that it's a zero-sum world. I can only win if you lose, right? It's all about Darwinian survival of the fittest. Well, Darwin never said survival of the fittest. You can look through everything he ever wrote, and I promise you, you will find it nowhere. It's an incorrect paraphrase, and what he actually spoke of is survival of the collaborative, of the adaptive, right? We are taught that what kind of world is it? It's a dog-eat-dog world. That's scary. Well, if you take a look at nature, we start to realize that dogs don't eat dogs, do they? So let us remove the blinders and recognize that together we are an unstoppable movement. And it's all about putting the cause first. Those of you nonprofits in the audience that are looking at earned income enterprises, I encourage you to do so. It creates phenomenal opportunities to diversify your revenue base. But I do want to mention a couple quick things in the context of that. Number one is it doesn't matter how valuable that business opportunity is, how lucrative it can be, if it does not advance your mission. You are given a charter and you are morally, ethically, and legally bound to devote all of your energies towards advancing your mission. And if you're here to promote arts education, yes, maybe there's not a hamburger stand around and it could be a good business, but keep your eyes on the prize. Stay focused, first and foremost. And if it doesn't advance your mission, don't bother with the business plan. Number two is from a fundraising standpoint, you should expect to invest substantially more time in your fundraising if you're a nonprofit starting an earned income enterprise. And that's because we don't have equity. We don't have profit sharing. We're not a traditional for-profit startup. So as a result, it tends to be harder to raise money. It is out there. These impact investors are out there. But instead of doing rounds of fundraising, it happens on an ongoing basis, and it takes a substantially large amount of time, which is okay, but just know that going into it. Again, these people hang out in certain places, these impact investors, and so check out the Social Enterprise Alliance, se-alliance.org. They do a great annual conference and have a variety of regional chapters and a very valuable listserv. Take a look at svn.org, Social Venture Network. They do annual conferences as well, as does SOCAP, which is a great gathering of impact investors, social entrepreneurs, and nonprofits. Happens every year in San Francisco and Europe. And finally, investorscircle.net, which is kind of American Idol for socially responsible businesses. And I want to transition here into my final point around next generation leadership, because what's really interesting is that there's a huge opportunity. In fact, I would argue that a revolution is coming, and it will take place in each and every one of our lifetimes, regardless of your age. And that's because it's already started and all the data is pointing in the right direction. And that revolution has to do with service. I think sometimes, I think of this country as an alcoholic. And for me, the silver lining of the problems that we're facing, and again, there are many, is that I believe we had to reach, or we have to reach, rock bottom before a critical mass of us could wake up and realize that we have a problem and accept that we're ready to embrace change. And regardless of your politics, our current president rode into the White House on a one-word mandate: change. And what you see, if you look at UC Berkeley, at the business school where I teach, is you see 38% of the students there signed up for the program because of the focus on social responsibility, because of the focus on social enterprise. They want to be part of the solution. Similarly, if you look at the baby boomers, they have a fundamentally different view of what retirement means. They don't want to just live on the beach and golf and see their grandkids a couple times a year. They want to be part of the solution. But the revolution I'm referring to is this. They don't just want to volunteer and donate their time and lick envelopes or pour soup, right? They want to give of themselves. They want to share their talent. They want to share their contacts. And if they were an accountant for 30 years, they want to be able to help you balance your books. If they were a journeyman carpenter, they want to work with Habitat to help them build houses. And so the revolution is around pro bono service, which traditionally is really limited to lawyers. Well, that is changing in a big way. And the nonprofits that are innovative enough to look at how can we zero out some of the line items in our budget? How can we work with skills-based volunteers to better meet the needs of our community? This is a huge opportunity, and there's a really big possibility that gets opened up when nonprofits start to think this way. As we look at the younger side of the spectrum, at young leaders in particular, a lot of nonprofits are worried about a leadership vacuum. And first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that the Chinese, this is so brilliant and simple in its elegance. In Chinese, the kanji character for crisis is danger, but it's also opportunity. It's the two of those together. So what is the danger? Well, the reason why so many people talk about a leadership vacuum is a combination of two factors. It's math. There are 78 million baby boomers that have started to retire. There's only 38 million Gen Xers, people my age, half as many bodies. Compound that with the fact that in 1980 there were 300,000 registered nonprofits in this country. Today there's over 1.5 million. 5 times as many organizations, half as many bodies. Hence the concern about a leadership vacuum. Well, what's interesting is that when I was at Craigslist Foundation, I started a coalition called the Next Generation Leadership Forum to look at this question, is there a vacuum, and if so, what do we do about it? We basically couldn't agree on the first question because there's data to support both points of view. But what's fascinating is we came to consensus that regardless, our course of action as a sector remains the same. Number one, we need to increase our pipeline of new leaders into the sector. Single greatest way to do that is to work with career counselors, with colleges and academic advisors, so that they are educating our youth to let them know about the viability of careers in the social sector. Idealist is doing some great work in that space. Number two, we need to maintain our talent. Compass Point did a great study showing that 50% of our executive directors leave not only their jobs, but the sector within 5 years. So we can get new leaders in the pipeline, but if the pipe is leaking, we still have a problem. The best and most cost-effective way they've seen to address that issue, by the way, is through executive coaching. So consider providing that kind of support to your leaders. And then finally, we need to engage the boomers, and we need to engage Gen Z, these youth that are the biggest generation in history. So look towards the baby boomers as mentors, as board members, as skills-based volunteers, and look to the youth as leaders as well. And as you look to engage youth, there's 3 things I would share. Number one is grow the 3%. That's not an Occupy reference, by the way. What I mean by that is BoardSource did a study showing that only 3% of nonprofits in this country have a single board member under the age of 30. And how many of us serve youth as part of our constituents? By the way, it's only about 9% have a board member under the age of 50. So we need to proactively, especially if you're focused on serving youth, put a mandate in your bylaws that 1 board seat is reserved for youth, however you define that. Number 2, get social, especially if you want to be hip and attract these people, establish a social media presence and make it vibrant. Look at LinkedIn, who just launched a whole nonprofit resource center where now your board can add their nonprofit board service to their profiles. There's not too many groups on LinkedIn using this yet, so be one of the first and show these youth how innovative you are. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, put the youth in charge in teams. If you look at the way youth work, you might call it a sense of entitlement. You could also call it leadership. They are not interested in busy work. They're not there to just punch a clock. If the work is not fulfilling, they're out the door. So give them the reins, put them in a team, which is how they're used to working in this interconnected world, and watch amazing things happen. And in closing, I just want to share a brief story. Does anybody know where Bill Cosby went to college? Temple University in Philadelphia, very good. Well, Bill, when he was getting his master's degree at Temple, he was in a philosophy class. And there were 150 master's and doctorate students in this class. And they sat around for an hour and a half, and all they did was debate, is the glass half full or half empty? As you might imagine, they didn't get very far. And Bill was pretty frustrated. His family was making a lot of sacrifices to put him through school. And so he leaves class. He's kind of downtrodden and despondent. He's huffing and puffing, walking through the Philadelphia streets. And he gets home, and his grandmother's there waiting for him. And she says what grandmas pretty much always say when you come home from school, which is, "How was class today, Bill?" And he kind of blows her off. "No, I don't want to talk about it." But she presses him. "No, really, I want to know. How was class today, Bill?" And he tells her, "Well, Grandma, if you got to know, it was incredibly frustrating. We had 150 master's and doctorate students sitting around for an hour and a half. And all we did was debate if the glass were half full or half empty." And his grandmother, with a second grade education, mind you, without missing a beat, says, "Oh, well, that's easy. It depends on if you're pouring or drinking." Pouring or drinking. And the reason why I wanted to end with that story, especially since we're here to talk about fundraising, about innovation in the social sector, is that I believe we face a chronic obstacle in our efforts as a sector to raise money, which is that we consistently take this tin cup begging for alms approach to our work. We mistakenly think of ourselves as the drinkers, right? We have to rely on the charitable contributions of others to do our work. And although that may have some fiscal truth to it, spiritually, in truth, nothing could be further from the truth, right? We are the pourers. We are the nurturers of society. And what we do as a sector is that just like water, we are a channel, we are a conduit. And we allow people with means, with resources, to affect the change they want to see in the world. And it is their honor and privilege to support our work, because people don't give to you, they give through you. And you are that conduit for them. You are doing them a service, and this is holy work. So I just want to thank you for all of the work that you do. And I want to thank you not only on behalf of myself and the organizers and sponsors here today, but I want to thank you on behalf of the tens of thousands of people that you collectively serve. It's truly an honor to be with you.
Thank you very much, Darian. And now if you have written a question on an index card, this is the time to hold it up high and so the staff can see it and come around and collect it from you and give it to me. The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host, who today is Angela Holt of WVDO. Angela is the Director of Corporate Philanthropy for Cambia Health Solutions, the parent company of Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oregon. She also serves as Executive Director of the Cambia Health Foundation and is on the governing board of Albertina Kerr Centers. Angela.
Thank you, Melody, and thank you, Darian. Darian, you discussed the opportunity to put the community to work for your cause, and there's no doubt that social media is a very important part of that equation. Could you please give us an example of an organization or a cause that has really set the standard in terms of utilizing social media to not only raise awareness, but then to turn that awareness into activation and engagement in terms of donors and volunteers?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So I think Charity Water is actually a really good example of this. charitywater.org. They have established a really vibrant social media presence. And they've raised millions of dollars exclusively through online, not counting all of their traditional fundraising efforts. They've done this through a variety of ways. First of all, they've built up a large audience online. They do a photo of the day, which has generated millions, literally, of Twitter followers. But then, to your point, they've also connected, they've gotten that audience engaged. It's not just enough to get these people to follow you. How do you get them to take action, to raise money, and to donate? And so they really were one of the initial champions of this whole donate your birthday concept. And so they've had, dogs, 6-year-olds, as well as a wide variety of adults that have donated their birthday to provide access to clean water for people in sub-Saharan Africa. And the key thing here is what they've done so effectively that's been integral to their success is they've met people where they're at. They've made it really easy for them to raise money, to spread the word. They've created templates. They've, put together sort of a donate your birthday in a box. And that is really crucial, combined with the understanding that you hear the word slacktivist a lot. Does it really matter if someone follows you on Facebook or signs your online petition? And the answer is absolutely, because that is the beginning of a spectrum of engagement. And once you get them in your pipeline, now you have the ability to communicate with them and more thoroughly engage them, getting them to the point of, donations, fundraising, and more.
We will now take questions from the floor. As always, we invite members to our microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a privilege of club membership, but today we would also welcome members of WVDO to the microphone. Before asking your question, please identify yourself and ask your question in under 30 seconds. If I flash the famous City Club question mark, it means you need to wrap up your question. I'll also be sure to ask one index card question.
Thank you. Anthony Petchel, City Club member and WVDO board president. My question is around our over access to information. Our donors, funders have access to more information now than they have ever had about nonprofits, which is a good thing. However, there's been undue focus put on administration rates. So nonprofits have, in my opinion, placed more restrictions on themselves, have created the starvation cycle where they're cutting their internal infrastructure to lower their administration rate to appeal to donors when in reality it's harming their organization. I was wondering if you could comment on how we could rephrase that conversation with our donors and our funders about not necessarily our admin rate, but our impact rate.
That's a great question, and I think it's something that a lot of organizations struggle with, especially because those online services like Charity Navigator are becoming more popular, and people are looking to those, and that's part of what they're factoring into their decision. I think two different things. One issue is that we are transitioning from a world of search to a world of discovery. And so anything nonprofits can do to be proactive about that, where it's not enough to just give people access to lots of information, we need to take it upon ourselves to be thought leaders and to be content curators. So for example, on your social media presence, at least half of the posts that you should be putting up shouldn't be about your organization, they should be about the issue. And that's a great way to establish thought leadership in an area because ultimately people care more about the issue than they do about your individual organization. So embrace that and watch people flock to your cause and start to respect you on a deeper level. From a standpoint of looking at percentage of overhead and things like that, I think ultimately, to your point, the focus really does need to be on impact. If you look at Coney 2012, they caught a lot of flack for the fact that they spent a lot of money on overhead. But you know what? You can't argue with results. You can't argue with what they've produced, with the fact that they have achieved their mission in about a 6-month period, which is the U.S. has armed forces on the ground in Africa now, helping local forces search for this dictator. And that has only happened because of the upswell. And so I think there's always going to be a role for these objective, third-party, quantifiable statistics, but ultimately, even though those are important, the key is really to focus on, again, people don't give to you because you have needs, but because you meet needs. So being able to clearly articulate what you've been able to achieve versus what you need, and moving forward, what you will be able to achieve with that support. For me, I've seen that that's always the key ingredient to a successful ask and fundraising process.
Let me take one now from the tables. How can the millennials, those born in the 80s and 90s, become more involved?
Good question. I mean, I think that the millennials are already incredibly involved. Again, back to Coney 2012, that's been fueled predominantly by youth. Just because they built their base by doing tours all around the country in school auditoriums. And so what you see is a huge community of youth that are very active online, that are engaged in causes, and that want to be part of the solution. And so my advice to youth is basically to take it to the next level. I talked earlier about the role of youth on boards, and I very consistently encourage young leaders to actually get outside of their comfort zone and seek to join a board. Perhaps that starts with a volunteer role, and a lot of times youth will say, I've done a lot of work training youth on the green economy and then in the nonprofit sector. A lot of times they're a little skittish because they feel like, well, who am I and do I have enough expertise and knowledge? And what they don't always realize is that it's almost a benefit that they aren't entrenched in the way things have always been done, and that they bring this not only a fresh new perspective to this social change work, but they also bring a keen, innate sense of the technology that makes amazing things possible. And so that perspective is invaluable to nonprofits. I mentioned that the online giving is going up 35 to 55% a year. It's actually the larger big budget organizations that are seeing the 55% increases. And that's because they have the funds to invest in this area. Well, those smaller groups still have a huge opportunity here, and youth volunteers and board members are really a phenomenal resource that I think are underutilized.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for further questions, and we're going to have to stop this conversation here. There will be no Friday Forum next week in honor of Memorial Day, but please do join us on the PSU campus on Friday, June 1st, for the Portland Action Summit, where we will hear from 3 of Portland's youth leaders. And as we close for today, please join me in offering a sincere thanks to today's speaker, Darian Rodriguez-Heyman. We are adjourned.